I trusted HR to have my back, but they didn't. They brushed off my harassment complaint like it was nothing. Every email, every inappropriate comment, every uneasy glance, ignored. And that's when I realized, the only way justice would happen was if I turned their own rules against them. I had been working at my company for over 3 years. 3 years of long hours, tight deadlines, and sleepless nights, all dedicated to building a career I could be proud of. I loved my job, respected my team, and believed in the company I worked for. I thought I was safe, untouchable, until the day everything changed. It started small. A comment here, a joke there. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was overthinking it. But then, it began to escalate. He, a senior manager I had always respected, started paying too much attention. Comments about my appearance, questioning my work in front of others, subtle but constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was harmless, just a passing phase, that it would stop if I kept my head down. But it didn't. He would hover behind me at my desk, leaning in when nobody was watching. Emails arrived with a tone that was chilling, demanding, sometimes mocking. The jokes in meetings? Everyone laughed, except me. I began to feel it every day, unease, fear, and that sinking feeling in my stomach when I realized I was walking into an environment where I didn't feel safe. My coworkers noticed. Some avoided eye contact. Some whispered, but never to me. And that's when I understood, this wasn't just a bad day or a misunderstanding. This was harassment. And it was happening to me. For the first time, I questioned everything. My confidence, my safety, my future at the company. I knew I couldn't just endure it anymore. Something had to change. After weeks of enduring the harassment, I finally decided to do what I thought was the logical next step. I gathered my courage, took a deep breath, and walked into the HR office. I was nervous, but I believed they would listen. I believed that my complaint mattered. I explained everything. Every comment, every unwanted email, every uncomfortable moment. I handed over the notes I had kept, hoping that the documentation would make it clear how serious this was. I expected understanding, empathy, action. But what I got instead was disbelief. A casual shrug. "It's not serious," they said. "Maybe you're overreacting." I could feel my heart sink. Every word I had spoken, every moment I had endured, reduced to a phrase. I tried to explain further, to emphasize the impact it had on me, but they barely looked up from their screens. They were polite, yes, but dismissive. I left the HR office that day feeling smaller, unheard, invisible. The very people who were supposed to protect me, to enforce the rules, had failed. They didn't see the fear in my eyes. They didn't see the late nights I spent second-guessing my own work. And that's when the anger started to grow. I realized something crucial: HR wasn't there to protect employees like me. If I wanted change, if I wanted the harassment to stop, I couldn't rely on them. I would have to take matters into my own hands, and do it smartly. I needed a plan. And that plan would start with their own policies. I left HR that day with a mix of anger and determination. I couldn't rely on them, but I realized something important: the company's own policies were written to protect employees, if only they were followed. And that's when I decided to start documenting everything. Every interaction, every comment, every suspicious email, I wrote it down. I created a detailed timeline of incidents, noting dates, times, and witnesses. No detail was too small. Even seemingly harmless remarks were included, because patterns matter. If HR had ignored me before, I needed evidence they couldn't ignore this time. I started taking screenshots of emails, saving every message that hinted at intimidation or harassment. I kept copies of reports, meeting notes, and even casual office conversations that highlighted his behavior. It felt obsessive at first, but I knew that meticulous documentation was my only shield. I also quietly observed the office dynamics. Who saw what? Who could confirm my experience? Every potential witness was noted. I wasn't trying to scare anyone, I was building a case I could never regret. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. It wasn't easy. Every day, I had to smile, act normal, and pretend nothing was wrong while secretly collecting evidence. But each note, each email saved, each detail recorded was a step closer to justice. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. I would follow HR's own policies, step by step, and force the company to take action they had refused to take voluntarily. Once I had every incident documented, I turned my attention to the company's HR policy. I read it cover to cover, every paragraph, every clause, every procedure. At first, it seemed overwhelming, full of legal jargon and vague instructions. But then I realized something critical: these weren't just rules, they were a roadmap. And if I followed them exactly, I could make the company take me seriously. Step by step, I began to implement the policy. I submitted a formal written complaint, referencing specific incidents, quoting the very rules HR had written about harassment and employee protection. I copied the right channels, escalated to the proper management levels, and even included potential witnesses. Nothing was left to chance. I knew HR couldn't ignore me now. The policy clearly stated that formal complaints must be investigated promptly. Every email I sent, every report I submitted, was aligned with their rules. And yet, I could feel the tension building. The harasser didn't know I was preparing this. HR still thought they were in control. But I had the advantage, knowledge of the system they assumed I didn't understand. It was meticulous work. I kept copies of every email, every submission, every confirmation of receipt. I followed the timeline exactly as the policy instructed. No shortcuts. No mistakes. Because if I slipped, if I went off script, everything could collapse. But if I played it perfectly, the company had no choice but to act. Slowly, the power started to shift. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt like a player in a game I had finally learned to win. After weeks of following HR's policy meticulously, I could feel the tension in the office begin to shift. Emails that had once gone unanswered were now met with delayed, cautious responses. Meetings were called, but this time, I wasn't on the defensive. I was in control. I escalated my complaint to higher management, referencing every incident, every email, every witness. I attached the official HR policy and reminded them, subtly but firmly, that failure to act could leave the company legally liable. I wasn't threatening them, I was holding them accountable using the rules they themselves had written. HR started to panic. The casual dismissiveness was gone. Suddenly, I had leverage. Every document, every screenshot, every detail in my timeline was now a sword I could wield. For the first time, I felt the scales of power shift. They couldn't ignore me anymore. I also sought legal advice, not to sue immediately, but to understand exactly what steps would hold up if it came to that. I learned the loopholes HR had ignored, the legal obligations they had brushed aside, and how to present the situation so that they had no choice but to act. By this point, the harasser began noticing subtle changes. My confidence, my assertiveness, and the fact that the company could no longer ignore the documentation made him uneasy. I didn't confront him directly yet. I let the system do the work. It was a delicate game, but I had mastered it. I wasn't just an employee anymore, I was a strategist, using knowledge, evidence, and procedure to force justice that HR had refused to deliver voluntarily. After weeks of escalation, the tension in the company reached a breaking point. HR and senior management realized they could no longer ignore the situation. Every document I submitted, every email I had saved, every policy clause I had followed became undeniable evidence against the harasser, and against their own failure to act. The company called me into a private meeting. It wasn't threatening, but it was serious. I was presented with a settlement offer, a resolution that would remove the harasser from the company quietly, without public scandal, and acknowledge my complaint formally. It wasn't revenge, it was justice executed with precision. I remember sitting there, reading the papers, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. Months of fear, stress, and uncertainty had led to this moment. The harasser, once untouchable in his position, was finally held accountable. And the company, finally forced to act by the rules they themselves had ignored, had no choice but to comply. It was quiet, but it was victory. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to shout or threaten. I let the system I had learned and followed do the work. Justice, it turned out, didn't require breaking rules, it required knowing them better than anyone else. Walking out of that meeting, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fear that had haunted me every day was gone. The harasser was gone. And I knew, for the first time since this nightmare began, that I had the power to protect myself and others simply by being smart, patient, and meticulous. After the settlement, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that had happened. Months of fear, frustration, and anxiety had taught me lessons I wish I had known from the very beginning. First, documentation is everything. Every email, every message, every note, even the smallest incident, can become crucial evidence. If you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, start recording it immediately. It's not paranoia, it's protection. Second, know your policies. HR and company rules aren't just words on a page, they are tools. If you follow them meticulously, they can work in your favor, even if the people in power initially ignore you. Knowledge is power. Third, escalation matters. If your complaint is dismissed at one level, don't give up. Follow the proper channels, and escalate carefully but confidently. The rules are there for a reason, and ignoring them can backfire on the company, not you. Finally, patience and strategy are key. Reacting impulsively or emotionally can ruin your case. Staying calm, organized, and precise gave me the leverage I needed to force action without putting myself at risk. I learned that you don't need to fight alone, you just need to fight smart. And in doing so, not only can you protect yourself, but you can also help prevent others from suffering in silence. Looking back, the entire experience was exhausting, stressful, and at times, terrifying. But it also taught me something invaluable. Strength isn't just about enduring, it's about knowing your rights, planning carefully, and using the system to protect yourself. I realized that fear can paralyze you, but knowledge empowers you. The same rules that were ignored, dismissed, and underestimated became the very tools that allowed me to reclaim control. I didn't need to shout or create drama. I didn't need to take shortcuts. I just needed to be patient, precise, and confident in the process. If there's one thing I want anyone watching this to understand, it's this: you are not powerless. You can protect yourself, stand up to harassment, and demand accountability without putting yourself at unnecessary risk. The key is preparation, documentation, and knowing the policies that are supposed to protect you. Walking out of that office for the last time, I felt free, not just from the harassment, but from fear itself. I had turned a situation designed to break me into one that proved my resilience. And I hope my story inspires anyone going through a similar struggle to believe, justice is possible. Sometimes, it just takes courage, strategy, and a little patience. Remember, it's not about revenge, it's about holding people accountable and protecting yourself. And if you do it right, you can win without breaking the rules. I did, and so can you. If there's one thing to take away from my story, it's this: harassment at work is never your fault. But how you respond can change everything. Document, know your rights, follow the rules, and never let fear decide your future. I shared my experience not for revenge, but to show that justice is possible, even when it feels like no one is on your side. You have the power to protect yourself, to hold people accountable, and to stand up with confidence. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone going through something similar, share this video. Help someone realize they're not alone, and that the system can work, if you use it wisely. Remember, courage, patience, and strategy can turn fear into power. And sometimes, the quietest victories are the most satisfying. Thank you for watching, and always stand strong. Your voice matters.